Hello and welcome to episode 16 of Stuckey's Travels. This will be the last one that I do by myself, and we're going to finish up Washington, D.C. So as you leave the National Mall area and head across the Potomac River, as I mentioned at the end of the last video, there are several things for you to see on the other side. You'll want to make sure that you see the U.S. Marine Corps Memorial. Sometimes people call it the Iwo Jima Memorial. The Arlington National Cemetery, which does have a pay parking lot. The Pentagon. The September 11th Memorial at the Pentagon, the Air Force Memorial, and then there's a mall called the Fashion Center at Pentagon City, which has a nice food court with a lot of selection. So this is the Marine Corps Memorial. It looks very different depending on what time of day you go. So I recommend, if you have a chance, to see it during both the day and the night, but it does look really pretty at night. Arlington National Cemetery, you can spend as much time in the cemetery as you'd like. You can walk on foot, or you can pay for a trolley to take you around and provide you with information at the different spots. So you can make sure that you see the two presidents who are buried at Arlington National Cemetery, which are President Taft and President Kennedy. This is a picture of the eternal flame at President Kennedy's gravesite. You can also go to the Arlington House, which is sometimes called the Lee Mansion. They were redoing some of it last time I was there, so it was closed, but it should be open by later in 2020 or 2021. There's also the mast from the USS Maine, and you'll definitely want to make sure you go visit the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It's very popular to watch the changing of the guard ceremony that happens every 30 minutes during the summer months and every hour during the winter months. This is during the changing, so that's why you see three people, but usually there's one person who's walking back and forth, taking 21 steps, waiting 21 seconds, and turning, and it's a very awe-inspiring opportunity, so make sure you don't miss it. You can also visit the memorial for the astronauts from the Columbia Space Shuttle, the Challenger Space Shuttle, and then the hostage situation that was in Iran. Those are located just behind the changing of the guard area between the USS Maine mast and the amphitheater area. This is the amphitheater. There's some speeches each year given in this space. There's seating inside. You can sit and take a break and rest in this area. So the Pentagon, you'll want to, one of the ways that you can get there is by taking the metro. You can also go from the Pentagon City Mall. There's a tunnel that goes underneath the highway and takes you over to the memorial for September 11th. This is the memorial. There's a lot of symbolism in this memorial that you can look up and read about. These are called cantilever benches, and it's just a lot of thought that went into this design. This is the Air Force Memorial. 3 stainless steel spires that go upwards, symbolizing the like the contrail of an aircraft, or from certain angles, if you're right at the base, it looks like kind of a runway that's disappearing. It's a really neat memorial, especially at night. Great view of the city. So leaving the Arlington area and going further south, it'll take you about a half an hour to get to George Washington's Mount Vernon. You could spend more than a half a day at Mount Vernon if you wanted to, so if that is something that's important to you, it will take up a chunk of your trip, but if it's something that you want to see, it's well worth it. So this is George Washington's home at Mount Vernon. This is the view of the Potomac River from the home. You can also visit the old vault where the family burial plot was, and then the new tomb of George and Martha Washington, along with the remains of other family members. You can see the 16-sided barn. You can walk down to the water and actually board a boat and go up the Potomac River. It's a pretty reasonably priced trip, actually, about 45 minutes long. I recommend that. There's also an education center with a lot of really neat exhibits, and a museum housing some sort of fancy artifact type pieces. Another trip that's outside of the DC area, if you're really into space, is the Air and Space Museum that's out near Dulles Airport. So there is the Smithsonian Museum of Air and Space on the National Mall area, but the one that's out by Dulles Airport, called Udvar Hazy, is huge. So if you're into that, you'll want to go there. So many different aircrafts, including the Enola Gay, which dropped the atomic bomb, and a space shuttle. The space shuttle is way bigger than I thought it was, and also looks a lot different close up than I thought that it would. So we'd already talked about the western part of the National Mall area, but now to cover the eastern part of the National Mall area. You could spend days in this section of the mall area, or you could spend one day or half a day, but you would really need more than one day to do justice to this. But you can pop into each one for each museum for like an hour, and have a good experience too. So we're going to start from the right and move to the left. We'll start with the Supreme Court, Library of Congress, and move down. We'll move from east to west. So this is the Supreme Court building. You are allowed to go in. You can quietly watch what's going on, depending on what the case is. They're not always in session, but you are allowed to walk around, and there are exhibits inside. Next, you can go to the Thomas Jefferson building of the Library of Congress. Beautiful, beautiful, ornate pieces. It really reminds you of an old European style building inside. There aren't very many places in the United States where you can see such ornate tile work, so I really recommend popping into the Library of Congress building. There's also an entry to the Capitol building from the Library of Congress. So if you see a big line at the visitor center area of the Capitol building, you can bypass that by using the security that's downstairs and going through an underground tunnel from the Library of Congress over to the Capitol building. It's kind of fun to do that anyway, so that would be my recommendation. Another couple pictures of the Library of Congress. So the Capitol Visitor Center is on the back side. So if you're standing at the National Mall area and looking at the Capitol building, you'll need to walk up Capitol Hill. It doesn't matter which way, either to the right or to the left, around to the back side. And then the Visitor Center is one level down. So you'll find some stairs that lead downward, and that's where you'll wait in line. Pretty strict rules on what you're allowed to have with you. So make sure you look at the Capitol building's website with visitor information so that you don't have any items that get taken away. So you do about an hour-long tour of the visitor center of the Capitol building, which starts at a video talking about what happens within the building, and then you move throughout the building, including seeing the star on the far right, which is the geographic center of the original Washington, D.C. You can see the old area where, like, John Quincy Adams and other representatives had their desks. You can walk past whoever's the current Speaker of the House offices are. You can even ask your House of Representatives, you can ask your representative for tickets to see the House or the Senate. The House of Representatives is available with tickets, but you do have to ask for those separately from your normal visitor center ticket. You get to see the Capitol Rotunda, which is a beautiful, awe-inspiring experience, and you also get to see several statues. Each state gets to have 2 statues that are on display somewhere within the Capitol building. Usually only, not all states have one that's visible to the public. Indiana's, one of Indiana's is Lew Wallace, so you can see that on your tour. You can see each state has a couple, so there's several. Next, you can start again with Smithsonian museums. These are from the art museums. There's a west and an east. The east one is more contemporary modern art, like the Warhol painting that my brother Luke is posing with. And the one on the left is the older, like famous artists that you might be thinking of, like older, like Monet, Rembrandt, Picasso, those sorts of things. So you can get from one to the other underground through a really cool art piece that's a tunnel. You don't have to leave above ground, so it's just another kind of secret passageway, if you will. Next, you'll want to make sure you line up for seeing the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, and the Constitution at the archives, the National Archives building. The line moves fairly quickly, but I wouldn't recommend, if the line is wrapped around the corner, I wouldn't recommend spending the time. I would come back later when the line is just maybe 50 feet out the door, because if the line's out the door, there's probably another line once you get inside at the rotunda area. So you aren't allowed to take these pictures anymore. At one point in time, you were able to have a camera in the rotunda area, but people didn't know how to work their cameras and were making their flashes go off, and it was damaging the very old documents. So now photography is completely prohibited, but I still recommend going and seeing these amazing documents. So this is the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. So we have the Hope Diamond on the left. There's a very large display of animals from around the world. And then there's a huge display of minerals and gems. Some of them are quite huge. There's a dinosaur exhibit, and just a lot of, if you're interested in science and nature, you'll want to spend some time in this museum. Next is the Smithsonian Museum of American History. If you like pop culture, this is a museum for you. As you can see in the picture, Dorothy's red slippers, Kermit the Frog, famous pieces from pop culture, Abraham Lincoln's hat, the First Lady's inaugural ball gowns, the Batmobile was there last time I was there. So just some really cool exhibits of places that you might be familiar with. This is the Smithsonian Castle. It's just really a Smithsonian Visitor Center and office complex at this point. But this was the first Smithsonian Museum back in 1855 when it opened. So it's a beautiful picture on the National Mall, but you won't be spending very much time inside. This is the Air and Space Museum that is on the National Mall area. So if you're really into space, you'll want to visit the one out by Dulles Airport and this one. If you're not so much into space, you'll want to skip the one out by Dulles Airport just because of the time to get out there, but you'll want to pop into this one and still see the different pieces that they have. So that's a very whirlwind tour of Washington, D.C. It was broken up into 3 episodes. So episode 14 was leaving Gettysburg area and entering Washington, D.C. from the northwest and covering the areas of the National Cathedral, the zoo, the Naval Observatory, the embassies. Then we moved down to the things that were north of the National Mall area. So we talked about Ford Theater, the White House, Kennedy Center, and so on. Then the next episode took us on the western part of the mall area. So a lot of our memorials. So the Washington Monument, the Vietnam Wall, the Korean Memorial, Lincoln Memorial, Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, FDR Memorial. So a lot of memorials. Probably you want to allow 30 minutes or so at each one during that 3.5-mile walking loop. Then in this episode, we took a trip across the Potomac River. You could spend a good part of a day just covering those, including probably a half a day to get yourself out to Mount Vernon, or a good 3 hours that you would need to spend getting yourself to and back from and visiting the Air and Space Museum at Dulles. So several opportunities in Washington, D.C. Once you get yourself there, pretty reasonable, really. Stay outside the city, find a hotel somewhere outside. If you can find a hotel that's walking distance from the train, I would recommend that. You can take that into the city, not have to worry about parking. You'll have a great experience. If you have questions, put them in the comments. Thank you.